have a confession. I often skip stories about RFK Jr. the same way I close my eyes during gory scenes in movies or cosmetic surgery videos on TikTok. I'm good. Stories about the anti-vax conspiracy theorist at the helm of our healthcare infrastructure with a coloration more disturbing than the orange man himself? Hard pass. That is, unless he's doing something particularly dumb, like challenging fellow Predator Pete Hegseth to push-ups at the Pentagon.
Here we are in the bowels of the Pentagon for the Pete and Bobby Challenge. I think this was your idea, so I blame you. What are we doing today, Bobby?
Well, Pete and I are going to do our part, encourage American youth to do this challenge. And the challenge is to do 100 push-ups.
Now I am become cringe, destroyer of worlds. But then I realized that this kind of selective attention is not just what got the United States into the nightmare that we're currently in, but more specifically the public health nightmare we're in. See, Americans only seem to talk about healthcare when we're sick, or when an insanely hot Italian man does an insanely popular thing. And I'm obviously talking about Andrew Cuomo running for office. Yay? When we're not sick, we move on from healthcare talk and get back to our lives, playing Russian roulette with our health and the health of others. A lot of us don't make it, strapped with medical debt, stuck in cycles of pain, addiction, mental illness, or facing diseases we don't have the time or money to fight. And here's the thing, I was recently sick. I had COVID, and it sucked. And guess who lapsed on their vaccines and wasn't masking? Me. And probably you too. But this video isn't about personal responsibility, which is something we over-rely on in this country, almost as a defense mechanism for being one of the only countries that lives under the cruelty of a for-profit healthcare system. This is about the responsibility of government to keep us safe, informed, and equipped with tools to protect our communities and our families in the 21st century, where we understand germ theory and we're not mending war wounds with sewing kits and saying a prayer. So because I owe it to myself and everyone else, I'm going to take the time to explain everything that RFK Jr. has done since he assumed control of Health and Human Services, the agency that oversees bodies like the CDC, the FDA, Medicare and Medicaid, and the National Institute of Health. And if you thought it was amateur hour at the Department of Transportation with Sean Duffy, or at the Federal Bureau of Investigations with Crazy Eyes Patel, just you f***ing wait. I'll take you through everything Kennedy has defunded, from medical research to vaccine infrastructure to mental health and addiction services, explain who he's targeting with his policies, and then what he and the MAHA movement claim they've accomplished, and where they're going next. Because even though he's done nothing to actually hurt his alleged sworn enemy, Big Pharma, MAHA believes it's done a lot by getting titanium oxide removed from Skittles. Is that the yellow one? Because if that's a yellow one, I'm okay with that. And in order to soften the blow of how utterly depressing this will all be, I'll throw in fun facts for the whole family about RFK Jr. Like, did you know he once released Snakes on a Plane? Like the movie Snakes on a Plane? How come we don't make movies like that anymore, huh? I can't wait for John Voight to fix Hollywood.
God bless everybody.
What Kennedy is ultimately doing is taking whatever amount of medical prestige, confidence, and healthcare affordability the US had and turning it into a deeply discriminatory, deregulated, AI-powered, supplement-heavy hellscape modeled after the anti-science proclivities of a 71-year-old anti-vax psychopath who's missing part of his brain because a worm ate it. And by the end of this video, I think you'll agree it didn't eat the right parts. What it amounts to is a horror show of healthcare that should concern anyone who's on a tight budget, disabled, HIV positive, immunocompromised, transgender, have a uterus, are a baby, don't want long COVID, measles, or bird flu, relies on Medicaid, relies on Medicare, enjoys eating food, or just likes life. And if there was any part of RFK Jr.'s MAHA magical thinking that attracted you, maybe taking aim at pesticides or big agriculture, I'll explain how he has absolutely no plans to go after corporate power, but will absolutely kill many of us. Before we talk about what Kennedy's been doing, I think there's a moment of the past 8 months that gets to the heart of the kind of quackery and incompetence that is currently helming our most important health agencies. Back in May, HHS released what it called the MAHA Commission Report, which was a deep dive into the ills of what it says is making Americans sick. Basically, 73 pages of confirmation bias of the Make America Healthy Again movement that thinks screen time and seed oils are a bigger threat to Americans' health than 25 million of them not having health insurance. More on seed oils later. Here's the problem. A bunch of citations in the study led to broken links, and many that were there were either misconstrued, overgeneralized, or straight up invented. According to Not Us, a section describing the corporate capture of media highlights 2 studies that it says are broadly illustrative of how a rise in direct-to-consumer drug advertisements has led to more prescriptions being written for ADHD medications and antidepressants for kids. The catch? Neither of those studies is anywhere to be found. Oh, okay, so now studies have to exist in order to be scientific? That's just what Pfizer would want. In another section titled American Children Are on Too Much Medicine, a Recent and Emerging Crisis, the report claims that 25 to 40% of mild cases of asthma are overprescribed. But searching Google for the exact title of the paper it cites to back up that figure, overprescribing of oral corticosteroids for children with asthma, leads to only one result, the MAHA report. Okay, but if you build it, they will come. Haven't you even seen Field of Dreams? God, I can't wait for John Voight to fix...
God bless everybody.
When checked on their mistakes, the MAHA Commission seemed to have fixed some of the errors, only to create new ones, which Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt chalked up to formatting errors.
Does the White House have confidence that the information coming from HHS can be trusted?
Yes, we have complete confidence in Secretary Kennedy and his team at HHS. I understand there were some formatting issues with the MAHA report that are being addressed, and the report will be updated, but it does not negate the substance of the report, which, as you know, is one of the most transformative health reports that has ever been released by the federal government and is backed on good science that has never been recognized by the federal government.
Good science that has never been recognized because it doesn't exist. Oh, but there's an even better follow-up.
Can you talk about what tools or research goes into production of these kinds of reports? For instance, is it AI that's used to put together these reports now?
I can't speak to that. I would defer you to the Department of Health and Human Services. What I know is just what I told you.
You tried to trick her, but Leavitt is following the first rule of being government AI propaganda, not ratting out other government AI propaganda. But she actually seems a little surprised, even though it's true. The MAHA report did rely on AI, which left many of the studies with the OpenAI telltale sign of the nonsense word oasite, or Weisheit. I don't know how to pronounce it. I just think it's ironic that a study claiming to find what's harming children and teens used the very AI harming the education of children and teens. What's next? Rooting out pedophiles by joining them on flights to their islands and orchestrating pageants for teen models? Insanity! Meanwhile, AI is exactly what Kennedy's Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services head, Mehmet Oz, wants to replace HHS physicians and employees with. And I, for one, cannot wait to fill my prescription for 20 milligrams of lorem ipsum dolor sit amet. The side effects are nuts. But what has RFK Jr. done so far? Well, just like Linda McMahon and the Department of Ed and Marco Rubio in the State Department, Kennedy is helming a government agency he is defunding and weaponizing. HHS is massively consolidating, shedding entire departments, firing 10,000 employees back in April, which was on top of 10,000 who took buyouts, for a 25% reduction in overall operations. Back in July, a judge ruled the layoffs were illegal and positions must be reinstated. So surely Kennedy is doing just that, because everyone in this administration follows laws. But taking a closer look at the people he's fired is pretty interesting, given this is someone who appears to put a personal premium on health himself.
Hey everybody, it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and every weekend I spend an hour or two at a place that looks like this. Wherever I am in the world, I go to a local gym. I found out a long time ago that if you hang out at a bar, you're probably going to get drunk. If you hang out at a barber shop, you'll probably end up getting a haircut. And if you hang out at a gym, you're probably to get in shape.
As dumb as that sounds, he kind of has a point. Like, if you hang around high schools, you'll start dating high schoolers like R. Kelly. And if you hang around presidential campaigns you used to criticize, one of them will make you part of the cabinet like RFK Jr. It's just hard to argue with the logic. Personal responsibility is a theme in MAHA, not the responsibility to get vaccinated and protect yourself and others, but the hyper-fixated responsibility of diet and exercise. Exercise is good for you, sure, but how would we know exercise was good for you unless it was studied throughout the years? You wouldn't. How would you know anything was good or bad for you unless it was studied and then policies or recommendations implemented based on it? You wouldn't. So it's curious that among the roughly 20,000 HHS staffers that were let go or forced to resign were those who were studying injuries, asthma, lead poisoning, smoke and radiation damage, reproductive health, and gun violence, as well as those that assess the effects of extreme heat and wildfires. So how are we supposed to know smoking 5 packs a day while pregnant with a loaded gun on your hip while huffing lead paint in 120-degree heat will hurt your long-term health, besides reading Lauren Boebert's autobiography? What does defunding these aspects of HHS mean in practice? Well, a Wisconsin official said that leaders of Milwaukee public schools discovered flaking lead paint and lead dust in school buildings, and children with elevated blood lead levels. When they turned to the CDC for help, the agency declined the request due to the April 1st staff cuts, the declaration said. In other words, good luck? Now let's say you do know that smoking is bad for you. HHS defunded resources that multiple states relied on to help residents quit smoking, or in West Virginia's case, getting teens to stop vaping. In Kennedy's new health order, you might not even know smoking was bad for you because he fired top tobacco regulator Brian King, which was such a layup for big tobacco, you'd have thought they donated to the Trump campaign. They did, didn't they? The top corporate donor to the main pro-Trump super PAC is a subsidiary of Reynolds American, the second largest tobacco company in the United States and the maker of Newport's the #1 menthol brand in the country. You see, menthol cigarettes are highly addictive, flavored nicotine that make up 36% of the industry as a whole and are often marketed to Black Americans. And they were briefly on the chopping block under Biden's FDA, but even a Democrat balked. Similarly, initially, even though Trump's own former FDA commissioner called vaping a teen epidemic back in 2018, and Trump was about to ban flavored tobacco, his campaign staff showed him how much MAGA vapes, and Trump flipped. Tobacco didn't need Don Draper, just Don Trump. On the 2024 campaign trail, he even professed that he would save vaping. I saved flavored vaping in 2019, and it greatly helped people get off smoking. I raised the age to 21, keeping it away from the kids. Kamala and Joe want everything banned, killing small businesses all over the country. I'll save vaping again. Yes, save the pastime of boys everywhere, and the preferred flavor, lemon ice. Probably. So what does Mr. MAHA know about the harms of tobacco and the predatory industry behind it? Not much.
Do you know the #1 cause of preventable death in America today?
The #1 cause. Well, I know what the #1 cause of deaths is in this country. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I'm talking about tobacco. You fired the head of the CDC's Office of Smoking and Health and eliminated their efforts from your budget. Hundreds of employees at FDA's Tobacco Center, including the director, have been let go. If we are genuinely concerned, and I believe you are, about the health of America and making it better, something as basic as the #1 preventable cause of death is not served by that kind of dismissal.
Oh, you almost stuck the landing, Dick. The I believe that you are serious about Americans' health. No, he's not. He's totally unserious about Americans' health. And this tobacco point might seem small, but it's actually indicative of the broader MAHA grift. Because another office that HHS eliminated was one that was studying chronic disease. Chronic disease, the thing you hear the most out of MAHA influencers and Kennedy himself.
Chronic disease. We're going to identify identify its root cause, and we're going to eliminate those exposures.
Chronic illness. The word's chronic illness.
Chronic disease doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, but it's got a preference. Like, if I'm diabetes, I'm gonna go to a state without Medicaid expansion because a Republican legislature called Obamacare socialism. And if I'm a pathogen, I'm definitely going to a state that never really locked down or masked in the face of a global pandemic. Like, if you're a chronic disease, it's better to be red than dead. But with all this focus on chronic disease, why would Kennedy eliminate the chronic disease department if he wanted to stop it? Unless he doesn't actually care about the causes of chronic disease so long as they don't fit neatly into his worm-eaten worldview. Because the leading cause of chronic disease in the United States is tobacco use. According to the former tobacco regulator Brian King, attempting to combat chronic disease without tobacco control is like attempting a triathlon without a bicycle. You're destined for failure before leaving the starting line. Wow, a little ableist, are we, Brian? Like, who's to say you need a bicycle to do a triathlon? What about a wheelchair? You know, the one you'll probably be in thanks to peripheral artery disease linked to smoking 5 packs a day in front of a lead-painted gym you're hanging around to try and get swole. But tobacco and nicotine use isn't just a total blind spot for MAHA. Kennedy himself chews Zyn. He did it during his hearing. God, how long is this teacher senator gonna be on my ass for? Time to pop a Zyn. Now, to be fair to him, there is like a 50% chance that could be home-cured roadkill jerky. Would anyone be shocked? Kennedy and HHS spokespeople swear that all the budget cuts and layoffs and elimination of entire departments is part of what it calls radical transparency, something Kennedy likes to say a lot.
My approach to administration HHS will be radical transparency. Radical transparency. Radical transparency.
Sorry, sir, could you say that last part with a little less spoon in garbage disposal? Except one of the agencies Kennedy defunded was the office that responds to the Freedom of Information Act requests at the Center for Disease Control. In other words, if you or any journalist is attempting to answer questions around the CDC's transparency, where they got a certain number, the number of deaths from, say, lead poisoning, what private contracts they might be doling out, there's no one there to get you that information. Which, to be fair, is probably what's so radical about radical transparency. Radical because it's not f***ing there. Hey guys, Francesca here, just interrupting to remind y'all to subscribe to this channel if you're not already subscribed, to share this video, and if you're listening as a podcast, to give the podcast 5 stars. You can also become a member on YouTube and support the show and get these videos one day early. You can also, my personal preference, become a patron, patreon.com/bitchuationroom, $5 a month, $10 a month. It all goes a very long way to support me and this small team. And also, breaking news, the Supreme Court just gave RFK Jr. a win and upheld $800 million in slashed grants for things like breast cancer and Alzheimer's because those were DEI. Yeah, because what about those of us who have good memories? Huh? Who's studying us? Before we go further, it's important to note that these HHS cuts don't impact us all equally, but explicitly take aim at MAHA's undesirables: low-income, disabled, transgender, elderly people struggling with their mental health and addiction. And if you're not one of those people now, chances are you could be in the future. It's a form of orchestrated social Darwinism, or what writer Derek Barris calls RFK Jr.'s soft eugenics. Where's the evidence? Well, one HHS department eliminated was called the Administration for Community Living, that supports both older Americans and people with intellectual and physical disabilities to live independently, giving them freedom to choose where and how to live with dignity. It gives states grants for nutritional assistance, home care, and family caregiving assistance. And now, it's been slashed. But on the plus side, here's RFK Jr.'s wife, Cheryl Hines, being snubbed for a handshake by Trump.
Crazy thought he's at the White House, the fights are on. It's pretty incredible. Crazy. It's insane.
It's so beautiful. I'm sure he would have shaken Olivia Nuzzy's hand. And while this regime pretends it's stopping the scourge of fentanyl and the drug trade, it has absolutely no empathy for the nearly 50 million Americans who struggle with addiction to drugs or alcohol. Trump's budget bill defunded the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration by $1 billion, the very body that tracks drug use overall. Overdose deaths were turbocharged by the pandemic, and states received extra funding to deal with them, as well as related mental health issues. But HHS canceled $12 billion in federal grants that had already been doled out to the states, not just to track infectious disease, but mental health and addiction treatment services as well. We're talking about things like suicide hotlines, crisis response services in places like Colorado, New York, and Washington state. The funds help bring down overdose deaths from the heights of the pandemic, even though illicit drugs still kill 84,000 people a year. But think of all the good things drugs have given us. Bright young students like RFK Jr.
And I was at the bottom of my class. I started doing heroin. I went to the top of my class. Suddenly I could sit still.
Ah, heroin. Helping Americans sit still since 1898. Very still. Also, it sounds like Kennedy just needed ADHD meds. Too bad those are overprescribed, according to Dr. Grok. We call him the Grokter. He just got banned from X for saying you need antibiotics. Oops. Another department Kennedy has taken aim at is HIV prevention programs, which is ironic because during his first term, Trump expanded HIV prevention programs and drove down infections by 30%. This time, however, he's handed the keys to a man who doesn't believe HIV causes AIDS. He thinks AIDS came from a vaccine, and he wrote about that in one of his anti-vax books, The Real Anthony Fauci, which, spoiler alert, is not about Fauci's skincare routine and love of model trains. He also said, like many bigots throughout the years, that AIDS comes from a gay lifestyle, and especially poppers?
And these people are dying mainly because of poppers. 100% of the people who died in the first, of the first 1,000 who had AIDS were people who were addicted to poppers.
No, people were not dying because of poppers. They were living. Look, if you think assuming the position of HHS secretary has meant he's given up on that batshit theory, I have bad news for you. In March, the FDA raided the offices of Austin Poppers manufacturer Double Scorpio. Imagine hating house music that much. And of course, because there are only two genders, as according to my great leader's proclamations. And I say that as a person confident in my womanhood and who believes that this is a specimen of perfect man. HHS is unsurprisingly targeting trans Americans, specifically trans kids. Back in May, it released a 400-page report that effectively says that gender-affirming care is too readily available and is dangerous, and that a child's gender should not be affirmed, but that gender dysphoria should only be treated with therapy. Now, that is a break with the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the American Psychological Association, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. But it is in line with the book The World According to Nancy Mace, which is a pop-up book where different trans people scare you. Ah! First of all, whatever happened to freedom, liberty, and parental rights? Second of all, the use of puberty blockers in trans youth is extremely rare, only 0.1% of an already tiny fraction of the population. Trans youth are just 1.4% of American kids. But the authors of this study wouldn't know that if they existed. What? Because the best part about this report is that its authors and their credentials are unnamed, which HHS spokesperson said was deliberate in order to protect them from intimidation tactics and undue pressure campaigns. Yes, we must protect the people doing studies about trans kids from intimidation. That's who's most directly affected by trans issues. But also, this very much sounds like your blonde girlfriend who's way hotter than Sydney Sweeney and lives in Russia and her parents are super strict, which is why she can't visit you. We know there's no one behind this study. It's just Stephen Miller and Mecha Hitler. The most ironic part about Kennedy being against gender-affirming care is that Kennedy himself does it. And it's likely unnecessary. He's admitted to taking testosterone as part of a scientifically unproven anti-aging protocol. Doctors only prescribe testosterone for men who have hypogonadism or low T, and it's not clear that RFK Jr. does. According to The Atlantic, many doctors are also understandably cautious about prescribing the drug to people who don't have an actual medical condition, because it's been abused for decades by athletes and healthy men looking to improve their physique, which might be why he went from a fairly normal aging man to whatever this is. Is that an improvement? I don't know. Honestly, he looks like a tourist put on a muscle souvenir shirt at Venice Beach. It's a choice. Cardiologist Steven Nissen studied testosterone use and found that it leads to an increase in bone fractures and discourages it from being used as a fountain of youth drug. But no matter, RFK Jr. will keep his gender-affirming regimen while simultaneously barring trans people from theirs. In other words, T for me and not for thee. Now remember, all of these cuts to programs that hurt the most marginalized and the most sick, all of it is happening against the backdrop of one of the biggest wealth transfers from poor Americans to the rich in the form of gutting healthcare and food assistance. Trump's fugly bill cut $1 trillion from Medicaid, healthcare for low-income disabled people, infants and mothers, and another $300 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. And speaking of SNAP, as I have pointed out on Piers Morgan Uncensored when faced with 3 Kennedy-defending ghouls, one of whom is a guy who's trying to live longer and measures his nighttime erections against his son's? Cool. MAHA is obsessed with healthy eating, but is simultaneously okay with cutting funding for SNAP, which is anachronistic to the idea of getting healthy food.
Right now, under Musk presidency, we are stripping away Americans' basic access to food in the form of Meals on Wheels that feed seniors, in the form of SNAP benefits that does include healthy meals. And the more money you give to SNAP benefits and Meals on Wheels, healthiest vegetables, green leafy vegetables, all the vegetables you need. But vegetables are more expensive than, yes, cheap carbs and McDonald's and all that. We know that. But if you actually fund those programs, which right now President Musk is defunding all of those programs, people aren't eating healthy.
With the prices of produce consistently higher than, say, Top Ramen, it's no wonder that low-income Americans try and make their dollars stretch farther. That's why under President Biden's American Rescue Plan, when SNAP benefits were increased, disabled seniors like Teresa Calderez was able to eat vegetables and, quote, whenever she felt hungry. After the money dried up, she was back to eating 1 meal a day because she gets $23 a month. And who knows what that will be soon. But I'm sure MAHA will rebrand Teresa's hunger as intermittent fasting. So long as she keeps up with her oregano oil, elderberry syrup, and IV infusions of ozone, she should be fine. Now, people love to blame poor folks for bad diet choices, but the fact of the matter is, in the richest country on earth, people are starving. And you might want to stop looking at them and start looking at your dumbass president, who's been starting trade wars and disappearing migrant farm workers to find out why people can't afford vegetables at nearly 40% more than they were months ago. Instead of trying to bring down the cost of healthy foods, the FDA is doing the opposite, approving waivers for states to limit SNAP benefits from being used on candy, soft drinks, or in Arkansas's case, fruit juices that have less than 50% juice. What's next? Pulp-only OJ for the poor? Listen to the current head of the FDA, Marty Makary, call the new limitations stopping government-funded obesity.
This begins the end of the government subsidization of our obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance epidemic.
Wait, is the FDA commissioner a troll doll? Can anyone prove he's not? Yes, keep blaming poor people for their choices when in fact wealthy, middle-income, and low-income people all eat ultra-processed foods and drink soda and eat candy at the same rate. It's almost like junk food is American culture. However, it's only poor people who get punished. Heaven forbid they eat a Snickers on their 1.75-minute break at the Amazon warehouse and have the energy to finish a shift. What about Medicaid? Because this guy oversees the distribution of healthcare that covers 71 million Americans and 40% of all births in this country. Let this mother of 3 explain how important Medicaid is to her family.
My whole house is on Medicaid. My husband, me, our baby daughter. Okay, we're all on Medicaid. Without Medicaid, I wouldn't be able to have the birth control in my arm that I have. Without Medicaid, I wouldn't be able to have the antidepressants that I have at no cost to me. Without Medicaid, I wouldn't be able to go to therapy to continue to be the mom I am to the 3 kids and 2 separate houses that I have to do. Without Medicaid, my daughter wouldn't be able to go and get her vaccines and go and get all of the things that she needs as an 18-month-old baby. Without Medicaid, my husband wouldn't be able to go and get the medications that he needs and the treatment that he needs for his disability. Without Medicaid, not a single person in my house would have health care. We are low income. Our only income is my husband's SSI. We would never be healthy. And for us, it's not even like body, it's all mental. For my husband, for me, and then we have a baby who needs Medicaid for vaccines, who needs Medicaid for, I already have 2 children who are diagnosed with autism. So what if she ends up getting diagnosed with autism?
Whoa, trigger warning, lady. You said birth control, vaccines, therapy, antidepressants, and autism? What's next? The G-spot? God. But there are millions of stories just like that. And yet, this regime believes that those on Medicaid are undeserving, that they're all able-bodied men who are mooching off the system, which is why despite 92% of Medicaid recipients already working or not working because they're a caregiver or a student, the new fugly bill also imposes nationwide work requirements come January 2027, even though states that have attempted to implement them in the past, like New Hampshire and Arkansas, ultimately scaled back the programs because they were ineffective at boosting employment and a bureaucratic nightmare. But let a TV doctor explain the rationale behind work requirements.
Remember, if you're an able-bodied person on Medicaid, you're spending 6.1 hours watching television or it's leisure time. So you don't want that.
KFF Health Policy found 92% of adult Medicaid recipients already are working, or they have the carve out because they have to have caregivers or they have to do other things.
They're fine. All they have to do is there'll be a simple app. If you've already carved out, that's super simple. If you're able-bodied and you're supposed to be working, we want to help connect you to the job market and get you into work. We have twice as many jobs available in America as people who seem to want them. The foundation of work is not just about fulfilling eligibility. The goal of healthcare insurance is to catalyze action in the right direction.
The goal of health insurance is to catalyze action in the right direction? The right direction for whom? See, I thought the goal of healthcare was to stay healthy, to see a doctor, to get treatment. But it sounds like you're saying the goal of healthcare in America is to be a tool of the 1%, to discipline the working class, to carrot and stick the poor so they accept subpar wages, terrible working conditions, in order to vie for a chance at survival in this Hunger Games-ass society we continue to invest in. Is that what you're saying? Of course, this is the same guy who's also floated the genius idea of 15-minute physicals instead of comprehensive health care.
15-minute physicals. Your local hospitals will fund these. They're incredibly inexpensive to run. You can screen thousands of people for almost nothing, and you allow a conversation to take place in more of a festival-like setting.
You know, he might be onto something. Like, how many times are you at the gastroenterologist and think, you know what this place needs? Porta potties and Molly. But just in case you thought that RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz weren't taking the robbing of healthcare from the sickest and poorest Americans seriously, don't worry. They have real solutions.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS secretary. And this is CMS administrator, my friend Mehmet Oz. And we're out hiking in Colorado and Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs. And I try to hike every day because it improves my focus, my clarity, my creativity. It also gives me sunlight. The sunlight is medicine. It gives you vitamin D in your body. Move a muscle, change a thought. If you want to change a bad mood, if you want to get out of your loneliness, this trap of loneliness, go out for a walk.
Yes, the solution for 17 million Americans who can't see a doctor is sunlight. And the cure for loneliness, going on a hike, because there's nothing like taking your pit of despair to the top of a tall, tall mountain. Undoubtedly, people will die because of these decisions, but they're more passively murderous, a little bit of small animal torture from an evil problem child, which makes sense given that according to his cousin, Kennedy used to torture small animals.
And he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed to his hawks.
Okay, maybe that's more actively murderous. The point I'm trying to make is that Kennedy gets worse. And yes, this is where we're going to talk about vaccines and the undoing of generations of healthy communities, children, breakthrough research, and life-saving medicine. And before we dig into everything, remember that during his confirmation hearing, Kennedy, a man who wrote 6 books against vaccines, called himself the Anne Frank of the anti-vax movement, and founded an anti-vax organization called Children's Health Defense, swore he was not an anti-vaxxer. He also swore during the hearings that if he ever saw data to contradict his beliefs, he would never stick on a point.
I will never stick on a point if somebody shows me data that says I'm wrong.
Another lie, because on vaccines, Kennedy has time and again been proven very, very wrong, and yet he still sows disinformation and is now actively destroying vaccine infrastructure from the inside. It's so well known how much of an anti-vax quack Kennedy is that the president of the Center for Science and the Public Interest, Peter Lurie, said that nominating an anti-vaxxer like Kennedy to HHS is like putting a flat earther at the head of NASA. Yeah. Or like putting the BFF of a famous sex trafficker at the helm of the deep state trying to investigate the death of said sex trafficker. No one would ever do that. Where? And because the pathogen is fresh on my mind or in my nasal cavity, let's start with COVID. HHS spokesperson justified the budget cuts for testing, tracking, and vaccination clinics by saying that HHS will no longer waste billions of taxpayer dollars responding to a non-existent pandemic that Americans moved on from years ago. We're like so moved on from COVID. We're doing Labubu's now. Whether we've moved on or not, she's still out there. The only problem is our statewide and nationwide ability to track COVID has been hobbled, though the CDC is still tracking things like hospitalizations, deaths, and wastewater. And there is a huge uptick of COVID in the poop this summer. An estimated 1 in 56 people in California are actively infectious, 1 in 50 in Florida, 1 in 19 in Louisiana, and 1 in 28 in Hawaii. And look, I had a rough time with COVID this time around. I lost my sense of smell and had horrible headaches. And guess what? I had let my vaccine lapse. The first time I had COVID, I was recently vaccinated and I felt tired for like an afternoon, but I also cleaned the whole house. And oh yeah, I was pregnant. And I guess I'm a little peeved because RFK Jr. just limited the COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant people despite there being absolutely no evidence that it is harmful to them. You know what there is evidence of? Raw milk being harmful to pregnancy. You know, the other thing that RFK Jr. imbibes besides testosterone. Recently, a mother in Florida lost a 20-week pregnancy after she and the fetus got Campylobacter from raw milk, which is akin to E. coli. And funnily enough, I've also had Campylobacter from food poisoning, and it was terrifying. You basically shit yourself every 30 minutes for a week, and I can only imagine what that would have been like pregnant or done to a fetus. Anyway, back to the COVID-19 vaccine, which through the Children's Health Defense Organization, RFK Jr. petitioned the FDA to remove, and he also said it was the deadliest vaccine ever made.
Is the deadliest vaccine ever made.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, but with less climbing roller coaster? The deadliest vaccine ever made? Okay. Let's do this. A 2024 study by the World Health Organization found COVID-19 vaccines reduced deaths in the WHO's European region by at least 57%, saving more than 1.4 million lives since their introduction in December 2020. A 2022 study published in the journal Lancet Infectious Diseases found that nearly 20 million lives were saved by COVID-19 vaccines during their first year. Researchers using data from 185 countries to estimate that vaccines prevented 4.2 million COVID-19 deaths in India, 1.9 million in the United States, 1 million in Brazil, 631,000 in France, and 507,000 in the United Kingdom. A 2022 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that 2 mRNA vaccines were more than 90% effective against COVID-19. The only problem with the COVID-19 vaccine is that it was rolled out as if it worked like a one-time silver bullet rather than something that had to be regularly received and would prevent the worst cases of hospitalizations and death. As professor of RNA biology and therapeutics at Johns Hopkins University, Jeff Collier said, vaccinations don't have to be neutralizing, meaning that you're not going to get COVID, but the important part of a vaccination is that they reduce hospitalization and death, and a reduction in hospitalization and death is proof of an effective vaccine. So surely, given all of that and the fact that Kennedy said,
and I will never stick on a point if somebody shows me data that says I'm wrong.
he would have changed his tune since becoming the HHS secretary, right?
mRNA vaccines don't perform well against viruses that infect the upper respiratory tract.
No, he did not. Kennedy recently canceled $500 million in mRNA contracts, which again is the vaccine technology that's been studied for decades and yet was bolstered by the pandemic under Operation Warp Speed. The one good thing that Trump did in the year 2020. Something that his own HHS secretary is now making him back away from, which he was recently asked about.
You were the driving force behind Operation Warp Speed, these mRNA vaccines that are the gold standard. Right. Now your health secretary is pulling back all the funding for research. He's saying that the risks outweigh the benefits, which puts him at odds with the entire medical community and with you. What is going on?
Research on what?
Into mRNA vaccines.
Well, we're going to look at that. We're talking about it, and they're doing a very good job. And, you know, that is a pass. With Operation Warp Speed was, whether you're Republican or Democrat, considered one of the most incredible things ever done in this country. The efficiency, the way it was done, the distribution, everything about it has been amazing. But, you know, that was now a long time ago.
That was then, and this is now. I'm more tired, and I need all the support I can get to distract from the Epstein files. Oops. Just like vaping or crypto or TikTok, once Trump found out his supporters liked something he previously criticized, he embraced it with vigor. God, what I wouldn't give for a Democrat to actually do a fraction of the same when it comes to the left. We all love Zoran and polyamory, but you don't see Hakeem Jeffries joining a throuple anytime soon, although, in all honesty, he'd sooner join one than endorse Zoran. But it's not just COVID. mRNA technology is being used to fight pancreatic, lung, gastric, colorectal, and other deadly cancers. A study published online in the journal Gastric Cancer found an mRNA-based vaccine led to a robust gastric tumor regression in mice. And as Syra Madad of the Harvard Kennedy School of Science writes, mRNA technology is already being explored for the next generation vaccines against influenza, RSV, and even H5N1 avian flu, a virus with real pandemic potential. Ah yes, the H5N1, or bird flu, which has infected 70 people since 2024 and killed 1. And yet another pandemic that RFK Jr. believes shouldn't be fought off with vaccinations of birds or by separating them, but just by letting it rip.
You should let the disease go through them and identify the birds that survive, which are the birds that probably have a genetic inclination for immunity. And those should be the birds that we breed like the wild population.
Right.
Oh boy, you hear that? My soft eugenics spidey sense is going off, because that same survival of the fittest logic is behind so much of Kennedy's dangerous science and now policies. Someone who treats human casualties not as things that can and must be prevented, but as superfluous outliers to his overall agenda. And just like the early days of COVID and present days, death is often blamed on the people themselves for having comorbidities or being of certain races.
The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not, but there are papers out there that show the...
I love the woman who's taking a drink like, didn't know this was going to be recorded. Here's the thing. You'd think someone who's so skeptical of vaccines and big pharma might do more to, I don't know, regulate them. Instead, RFK Jr. forced out the top vaccine regulator, Dr. Peter Marks, and in June, he fired all 17 members of the CDC's expert panel on vaccination and replaced them with 8 people whose views on vaccines align with his own. You know, that they do things like cause AIDS and autism. And yes, that is after he told Congress during his confirmation hearing he wouldn't make changes to the advisory panel or change childhood immunization schedules. Now his hand-picked advisory board is reviewing childhood vaccination schedules. And this is where my heart as a parent starts to palpitate because my kid already gets sick enough. It's called overpriced daycare. But the idea that she could be exposed to and bring home diseases that have been eradicated, like measles or rubella, is truly a terrifying prospect because thanks to the vaccine hesitancy spread by MAHA and the anti-vax movement, measles is making a comeback, one that nobody asked for, like low-rise genes or genocide. Remember, in the year 2000, measles was eliminated from the United States with no cases, thanks to the vaccine. But this year alone, there have been more than 1,366 cases, more than any year since 1992. They're especially cropping up in rural areas like West Texas, which is fittingly now under budget cuts by HHS and will find it even harder to access vaccines or care for, measles. But that doesn't matter to RFK Jr., whose Children's Health Defense TV, yes, they've got their own TV channel, which I really feel like should have been called Mumps Plus. The channel has been platforming Mennonite parents of a 6-year-old in West Texas who died from the measles, saying that the alternative to her not dying would have been worse.
Eine gut sein gesund nicht. But that's not so bad. Like there's doctors with the home turn. She says they would still say don't do the shots. There's doctors that can help with measles. They're not as bad as they're making it out to be.
And also the measles are good for the body.
So in the long run, he says they wouldn't get cancer as easily, and it fights off a lot of stuff, the immunity that they get from the measles.
Yes, it's so great that your daughter won't have cancer in the grave. She'll have a bunch of other flesh-eating diseases since she's, dead, but not cancer, allegedly. It's so crazy to me that we'll allow parents to neglect life-saving vaccines for their children. They die and nothing happens. But if they so much as try and affirm their gender nonconformity, they should be locked up. Forget that. If I say, let my child drive my car, which they really want to do, I'd be charged with neglect, even if they parked amazingly and hurt nobody. But if I refuse to vaccinate them and they die, I'm gonna be on television. Does anyone remember Requiem for a Dream? Just me? And this measles outbreak isn't the only one that RFK Jr. has helped to spread. He had a much more direct hand in the 2019 measles outbreak in American Samoa. Let Senator Elizabeth Warren explain what happened there.
Your role in the 2019 measles outbreak in Samoa. In July 2018, 2 children died immediately after receiving a measles vaccine that nurses had mistakenly mixed with a muscle relaxant. The nurses get charged with manslaughter, but vaccination rates go down. I asked you about this in my office. You told me flatly that your visit to Samoa had nothing to do with vaccinations. We now know that's not true. I have the documentation. You met with the Prime Minister, you talked about vaccinations. You met with an anti-vaccine influencer who described the meeting as, quote, profoundly monumental for this movement. So what happens? Vaccinations go down, there's a measles outbreak, and children start dying. But you double down. You didn't give up. Just 4 days after the Prime Minister declared a state of emergency, 16 people already dead. You sent a letter to him promoting the idea that the children had died not from measles, but from, quote, defective vaccine. You launched the idea that a measles vaccine caused these deaths. You are a very influential man. In fact, you are called the leader of the Disinformation Dozen. UNICEF and WHO, the World Health Organization, investigated this. They say the claims are false. It is not biologically possible what you claimed. And yet, ultimately, more than 70 people died because they didn't get vaccines. So my question is, do you accept even a scintilla, just even a sliver of responsibility for the drop in vaccinations and the subsequent deaths of more than 70 people? Anything you do differently?
No, absolutely not.
Sorry, could you say that again with less dying? Kennedy has blood on his hands, and he will have even more on them very soon. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure he doesn't go to tanning salons to look like a stucco rooftop. That's just dried blood. Kennedy is convinced, in addition to allowing preventable diseases to kill off swaths of expendables, that MMR vaccines, or measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines, which have been in use since 1971, cause autism. Yes, autism. The white whale of the anti-vax movement. A fate, according to them, that's worse than death. Let's hear Kennedy lie about autism here.
Autism destroys families. More importantly, it destroys our greatest resource, which are our children. These are children who should not be suffering like this. These are kids who, many of them were fully functional and regressed because of some environmental exposure into autism when they're 2 years old. And these are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date. Many of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And we have to recognize we are doing this to our children.
Okay, that is a lot of lies, but never go on a date? Have you not binged and fallen in love with every person on Love on the Spectrum? When I hear the idea that autistic people can't contribute deeply to society, I think about trailblazers like Greta Thunberg or Elon Musk, and one of those people does pay their taxes. But Kennedy consistently says that when he was young, there wasn't a thing called autism, and that it's developed recently, which means, according to him and No Sound Science, it must be caused by environmental exposure and, of course, vaccines. The problem with that is he's right. When Kennedy was growing up in the 1960s, autism wasn't recognized as a developmental disorder. Not until 1980 was it separated from schizophrenia. You know what was a disease that Kennedy grew up with? Beatlemania. An affliction that for some reason has all but been eradicated from society, except in high school when you find an incredible indica and discover the White Album. How come we don't talk about Beatlemania no more? And guess what? According to research, autism is not environmentally caused, but between 70 and 90% of it is genetic, as researchers have found over 100 genes in DNA that are linked to autism spectrum disorders. But of course, Kennedy doesn't care about existing research. Ew, talk about sloppy seconds. He's gonna do his own research with his handpicked teams to find out what the cause of autism is by September.
At your direction, we are going to know by September. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
Ooh, it's almost September. I can hardly wait what the quacktastic MAHA movement has in store for back to school season.
School is about to start. Fall is around the corner. You know what that means. The season where everyone seems to catch something is quickly approaching. That's why my family likes to stay stocked up and prepared, especially with trusted medications on hand. Ivermectin has been around for decades, but it's one of those we like to have ready just in case. Whether it's for peace of mind or being prepared for the unexpected, it's good to know you have it if you need it.
Oh God, it's the anti-trans influencer Riley Gaines hawking ivermectin, presumably instead of the COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah, for every household that just got done through potty training, wait till you get through a round of horse dewormer. Honey, just listen to your body. Okay, we're going back to diapers. We know that whenever the causes of autism report drops, it will be authored by unnamed nutjobs who may or may not be AI, and it will certainly lead back to Kennedy's biggest enemies, vaccines and food, specifically seed oils, synthetic dyes, and high fructose corn syrup. So let's get into it. Food is where MAHA believes its biggest victories have been, now that Kennedy has control over the FDA, which is also being weaponized not just against poppers, but for a Christian nationalist agenda, like reviewing the approval of mifepristone, the ingredient in Plan C pills, which account for over 60% of all abortions, and it's far safer than Viagra, penicillin, and Tylenol. Never mind all of that, did you know that RFK Jr. was once on the cover of Tortoise magazine? True story. That tortoise, 27th lover, second secret wife. Oh, does she have a tale to tell. But back to the so-called victories in food. In July, HHS put out this list of MAHA wins that involve various food chains doing away with synthetic dyes and seed oils, like Hershey, J.M. Smucker, and General Mills. Forget about accessing a doctor or clinic or not going bankrupt from care. Steak and Shake is moving away from seed oils and going to 100% beef tallow. Nothing to soothe a case of measles like beef tallow. I could go for a bowl. Now, even if you hate Kennedy, many crunchy libs also believe that these things are harmful for you. But let's take a closer look, starting with seed oils, like canola oil or grapeseed oil, which MAHA says cause chronic inflammation. The only problem is, despite being studied, there's no evidence to support that seed oils are inflammatory. However, there is evidence that seed oils lower cholesterol, whereas there is evidence that beef tallow will certainly raise it. As Derek Barris writes, multiple large-scale studies and meta-analyses have consistently found that replacing saturated fats like butter or lard or beef tallow with unsaturated fats from seed oils lowers LDL cholesterol. Higher intake of polyunsaturated fatty acids, particularly linoleic acid, which is an omega-6 found in seed oils, is associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. Okay, so what about food dyes, the ingredients that scare MAHA the most, which they say are petroleum-based? But as Barris also writes, there's no petroleum in food dyes. It is used in the production process. Petroleum supplies carbon skeletons that become the basis for synthetic dyes. Extensive processing transforms crude oil byproducts into safe, colorful, and stable dye molecules. Finished dyes are chemically distinct from petroleum, and they're highly purified before entering our food supply. The process for making synthetic vitamin supplements is chemically similar to food dyes. Petroleum is only a starting point. The final product also contains no petroleum. Oh no, what are you saying? There are synthetic dyes in my $90 a month vitamin subscription to Goop Wellness? Ah! And according to biomedical scientist Dr. Andrea Love, dyes like Red 40 don't actually cause harm even if you ate Mike and Ike's for every meal.
The acceptable daily intake of something like Red 40 in the US, it's 7 milligrams per kilogram per day, which is the same as it is in Japan, the same as it is in Europe, the same as it is in Canada, and the same as it is in Australia. And there's no way that you would be eating an excess in your daily diet, even if you only ate red colored gummy candy for your entire daily intake. We're not just gonna remove colorings. They're going to be replaced with other colorings, naturally derived chemicals. For example, one of which is cochineal, which is a red coloring that is extracted from scale insects. So it's very ecologically damaging because these insects live on certain cacti species and they're harvested by farm workers. They have high rates of allergenicity. We don't have that with Red 40. And on top of that, vegans and people that adhere to Muslim or kosher dietary habits cannot eat foods that are colored using insect-derived coloring.
And I have now felt the power of Allah and will not be partaking in eating cactus lice. But here's my honest question. These are huge corporations. I mean, not Steak and Shake, but General Mills. And they're able to simply forego artificial dyes and seed oil just like that? Forgive my cynicism when it comes to corporate benevolence, but what do you honestly believe? That Kennedy's FDA cracked the whip on these corporations, brought them to heel, or that seed oils and artificial dyes just aren't all that integral to their business model, so they're easier to give up? As Christopher Gardner, director of nutrition studies at the Stanford Prevention Research Center, said, it's true that we eat more ultra-processed junk food than we have ever before, but the evidence is clear that the harms of this kind of food have more to do with their calories and their high amounts of added sugar, sodium, and saturated fat than with seed oil. And there is plenty of evidence that sugar and refined flour do actually cause inflammation in the body. But do you think General Mills, the maker of Lucky Charms, is going to replace refined wheat and sugar with quinoa flour and stevia? I sure f***ing hope not, just for stoners' sakes. In fact, MAHA and RFK Jr. are touting things like Coca-Cola adding back real sugar over high fructose corn syrup in its products. But it's not really a win, since it's not replacing high fructose corn syrup products, it's just also making real sugar ones available. Not really earth-shattering to put sugar back in Coke. Now, putting the cocaine back in Coke, that's groundbreaking, and that is definitely when America was great. But is high fructose corn syrup as awful as we're all being told? Dr. Love also points out the science between sugar and high fructose corn syrup, and they're basically the same. Sucrose, cane sugar, glucose, and fructose molecule bonded. You consume 50% glucose, 50% fructose. High fructose corn syrup, also 50-50 glucose-fructose. Corn syrup, 100% glucose. Glucose isomerase, the enzyme in making high fructose corn syrup, converts to 50% fructose. Swapping HFCS for cane sugar and soda ain't doing shit. So they are the same. All that is just science talk for I should probably stop eating Trader Joe's sour strawberry candy belts. They are delicious, and because Trader Joe's Fearless Flyer said they're naturally flavored and sourced from a candy supplier in Turkey and gave them like a really charmed backstory, they feel less bad for me, but they're not. They're just not. Lastly, there is something that both Kennedy, MAHA, and even climate advocates and food justice activists gather at the farmers market to agree on. Pesticides, especially in high doses, are bad for human health.
We're going to look at pesticides and toxic exposures. It's all because we're being mass poisoned by processed foods, by pesticides, by chemicals, by pharmaceutical drugs.
And yet the forthcoming report from HHS called Make Our Children Healthy Again Strategy is basically another layup, this time for food and agricultural industries looking to avoid scrutiny into pesticide use. The draft report says that environmental regulators will work with food and agricultural stakeholders to ensure that the public is aware of and confident in existing pesticide review procedures. It described those procedures as robust and did not propose new restrictions. So it kind of looks like capitulating over synthetic dyes got them a pass for their real moneymaker. Also, big agriculture is one of the biggest lobbies in Washington, and over the years has overwhelmingly donated to Republicans. Now, there are some good things in the report, like promoting breastfeeding and evaluating the risks of microplastics to our health. Ironically, however, studies have found microplastics in 75% of breast milk, which I guess means it's back to formula, which we all know is checked and scrutinized for heavy metals by workers at the FDA safety lab in San Francisco who lost their job, didn't they? They did. But even when it comes to microplastics, does anyone seriously think that Kennedy and the billionaires who back MAGA are going to allow regulators to go after big oil, another top Republican donor? Absolutely not. Because acting on the few good theories that RFK Jr. has requires implementation through regulation, something the broader fascist movement he's part of is allergic to. Like my allergy to those lice. I am very allergic to whatever that is. I'm gonna sneeze right now. I'm gonna sneeze. Despite the pledge of radical transparency, all signs point to an HHS and FDA that is withholding information from the public and protecting corporate interests. In April, the FDA didn't name the companies involved in a romaine lettuce-linked outbreak of E. coli, which sickened dozens across 15 states and killed at least one person. The FDA had shifted in recent years towards greater transparency in the wake of large-scale outbreaks and heightened public concern about contaminated food, said Frank Yanis, the former deputy commissioner of Food Policy and Response at the agency. It is disturbing that the FDA hasn't said anything more public or identified the name of a grower or processor, said Yanis, who was at the FDA from 2018 to 2023. And while he rants about dyes and seed oils, Kennedy's FDA and CDC isn't doing basic food safety checks, in part because of the dojification of the department that was already falling behind. The Biden administration was already reorganizing, i.e. cutting back on food safety inspections, and state budgets had been cut by up to 60%. And then came RFK Jr. And at the FDA, 2,500 people were laid off, including workers in the Human Food Program, who are tasked with ensuring food safety, and scientists at the Product Safety Lab in San Francisco that tests foods for bacteria. Also gutted were communication staff at both FDA and the US CDC, who helped coordinate response to outbreaks and informed both consumers and businesses about recalled food. And hundreds of workers at CDC's Division of Environmental Health Science and Practice also lost their jobs. The organization coordinated government response to an outbreak of lead poisoning in 2023 linked to cinnamon applesauce pouches. And this mom of a toddler who likes pouches is getting triggered. The Division of Environmental Health didn't just coordinate after outbreaks, it also performed key research that led to food safety improvements, said Hal King, managing partner at the consulting firm Active Food Safety. The department researched best practices for food safety in restaurants. One of its successes was discovering that having a manager in charge of food safety improved conditions. Restaurants are now required to have a manager in charge of food safety. It evaluated the success of having letter grades for restaurants. It also researched ways to improve food worker behavior, such as persuading people to wear gloves when handling food or washing their hands after going to the bathroom. Yes, there is a reason there are signs in bathrooms that say employees must wash hands, because they're just like the rest of us and sometimes phone it in a little bit. But MAHA doesn't believe in grades, not for school children or restaurants, okay? Restaurants should be home health inspected. Kennedy's FDA even halted food safety inspection reforms that were underway because of pressure from lobbyists. The food traceability rule, for example, was designed to ensure better record keeping and was set to go into effect in January of 2026. But on March 20th, 2025, the FDA announced that it was postponing the compliance date by 30 months after heavy lobbying from the grocery industry. Okay, but has your health secretary even threatened a police officer with a falcon? Because you know who has? This guy. In summation of this very exhausting, but certainly not exhaustive review of just how hellacious one single man is to our national health, let's just put it plainly. RFK Jr. is a crank. He's deeply unserious about finding the root cause of what makes Americans so sick because he's unserious about looking at the most outstanding factor when it comes to American healthcare, our private insurance industry and the for-profit model. For all the big talk about corporate power, he leaves them untouched. But the fact remains, 25 million Americans are uninsured. And for those who have insurance, 40% are strapped with medical debt. And a third of adults say that in the past 12 months, they've skipped or postponed getting healthcare because of the cost. And without Medicaid, things are going to get even more dire. MAHA is a dangerous anti-science lifestyle brand for bored rich people sitting around their outdoor fireplaces in their summer home. They can buy the best doctors available, and so they look to anything else to blame, specifically individuals, for their circumstances, all while they hawk supplement lines. And that is where Kennedy is headed next. Because also in the forthcoming MAHA strategy paper, it says that HHS will foster public-private partnerships to accelerate innovation. The problem is, we had innovation. mRNA is innovation, and you killed it. What's not innovation is Palantir health tracking implants or whatever Black Mirror tech gadget comes next. MAHA uses its enormous wealth to dupe people into doing things like trying to live forever by measuring their nighttime erections against their sons.
We may be the first generation who won't die.
I agree.
Now, doing that, I've become the most measured person in the world. And we have measured everything, every biological age of every organ in my body. Also, we've measured the toxins in all foods and all supplements. I can tell you, I've learned the outcome is food is guilty until proven innocent. The toxin load in our foods is insane.
So no, you don't think that access to a doctor helps you stay alive?
So wait, hold tight.
No.
Like, why do you interrupt so much?
Because I'm trying to get to the point. I asked you a very specific question, and you're repeating how you're never gonna die, and all the blood boys that you have on lock, or like nobody cares, man. We're not as rich as you to live forever. People want to be able to see a doctor. People want to survive when they get a diagnosis. People want to get access to meds and not go bankrupt. Medical bankruptcy is the leading cause of bankruptcy in this country. Don't you know that? Or are you too rich to sort of like X yourself out of that situation?
Americans are simply trying to survive with dignity and not dysentery. And with this lying, sun-baked Stretch Armstrong in the position he is, that's becoming a whole lot harder. Oh my God, are you here at the end of this video? That's incredible. I don't even know how you got through it, but we got through it together. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not already subscribed to the Bitchuation Room on YouTube, do so right now. Make sure to support the show by becoming a member on YouTube, or personal preference, becoming a patron, patreon.com/bitchuationroom. $5 a month, $10 a month. It all helps me and this awesome team put together long ass videos like this. Thank you to Brent Godin, to Paige Omek, and to Andy Vasoyan. You can also listen to these episodes as a podcast, just like you can listen to our Tuesday shows every single Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And I will see you next time.